Number 10. The Giant Pharaoh. The absolutely bizarre skeletal remains of a man in ancient Egypt may have revealed the first known case of gigantism in the world. The crazy part about this skeleton is that it belonged to an ancient Egyptian pharaoh who lived 4,700 years ago. The skeleton was that of Astronaut, who ruled Egypt during the 3rd dynasty. A team of researchers from the University of Zurich recently investigated the remains and determined that the pharaoh had indeed suffered from an overproduction of growth hormones during his childhood that led him to become a giant, meaning he had a large head, massive hands and feet, and was extremely tall. The remains themselves were actually found quite a long time ago in 1901. The bones were found buried inside of an elite tomb, and they were discovered to be about 12% larger than the average set of bones for the time. Scientists have also said that suffering from gigantism in ancient Egypt may not have had any social disadvantages, unlike in other cultures where a person may have been persecuted for being extra large. On the flip side, it's well known that those who had dwarfism in ancient Egypt were held in high regard, as they were seen as almost mythical humans. As for why this pharaoh may have been born with the first ever genetic mutation that causes gigantism, nobody's really sure. But more research could hold clues as to how gigantism originated and if it really did come from a race of extraordinarily large people. Number 9. Finding Pan's Lair. Researchers working with the University of Haifa recently uncovered a Roman getaway in Israel, near the Sea of Galilee, and some experts are saying it could be the legendary Lair of Pan. This is because archaeologists discovered a bronze mask of Pan, the Greek god, at the very location, dating back to about 2,000 years. If you're not sure who Pan is, he's often depicted as being half man and half goat, strutting about on hooves and playing his favorite instrument, the lyre. Pan is depicted in all kinds of popular culture, from the Chronicles of Narnia to Disney's Hercules. But the true god is much more mischievous than the cartoons make him out to be. He liked to play music, he allegedly caused chaos wherever he went, and words such as pandemonium and panic were even derived from his name. Pan was worshipped in ancient times through ceremonies that involved heavy drinking, sacrifices, and other hedonistic activities. But here's why this archaeological site in Israel is so fascinating. The worship of Pan was normally reserved for outside city walls in places like caves, coves, and the forest. But here there is an entire lair with multiple buildings that may have been used in the worship of this deviant god. It was a compound that researchers believe could have been dedicated to Pan. How and why is a mystery that archaeologists have yet to solve. Number 8. Mysterious alien statues. Nuku Hiva is the largest of the Marquesas Islands located in French Polynesia. It's also the most mysterious. There are strange statues scattered all over the island, which many people believe depict beings from another world. The islands here were not populated until about 2,000 years ago, when settlers arrived most likely from Samoa. It was soon after arriving on the island that the residents of Nuku Hiva began to craft statues of things that don't look even remotely human. Many people have claimed they look like reptilian humanoids, which has led some to believe that the mysterious statues are proof the ancient and lost culture of Nuku Hiva worshipped a reptilian deity and may have had an encounter with aliens thousands of years ago. Of course, not everyone believes in reptilians or aliens. These statues could certainly just be a weird artistic representation of the native people. But the truth is that the statues look stranger than anywhere else on Earth. The statues show beings with huge eyes, small hands and fingers, and preposterously large bodies. To gain inspiration for such twisted artwork, it's believed that the ancient people of Nuku Hiva would have needed to witness similar creatures. The most likely explanation is, of course, aliens, though there's absolutely no proof of this yet. Have you ever gone to a remote island? Easter Island, perhaps? Or somewhere in the Caribbean? What did you find there? Tell me about it in the comments section down below. Then remember to subscribe to American Eye if you haven't already for more intense videos just like this one. Number 7. Ancient Mystery Skeleton. While completing a survey inside a remote cave in the far north of Spain, a group of spelunkers found something they'd never expected. At the end of a dark and cramped passageway, they found a fully intact human skeleton. After its discovery, it became known as the Navarra cave body, and it was placed neatly on the ground beside an underground stream with its arms folded gently across its chest. It was a deliberate burial in the darkest part of the cave that goes back 11,700 years. Believe it or not, this is one of the oldest intact skeletons ever found in Spain or throughout the entire surrounding region. The human dates back to what's known as the Pleistocene epoch, or the last ice age, at the beginning of the Holocene period on Earth, which we are all currently living in. Using radiocarbon dating, researchers were able to discover that the body belonged to a young man between the ages of 17 and 21, and that he likely had died from a head wound delivered by some type of weapon. Like others of the time, he would have been a hunter-gatherer and lived primarily in caves found throughout the region. Don't forget, this was way before cities. The bones of the strange man were finally taken out of the cave in March of 2021 and placed into a laboratory environment. Scientists are going to try their best to trace back the stranger's ancestry, but one thing we may never know is who placed the skeleton in the very back of the cave at such a time in human history when burying the dead simply wasn't important. Number 6. The new Nazca Lines. Nobody knows what's going on with the Nazca Lines. They were discovered a very long time ago in the Nazca Desert of Peru, dating back to about 2,000 years and designed by the ancient Inca. The giant geoglyphs cover an area of around 170 square miles and depict people, animals, and some things that don't quite look like they belong on the planet. Researchers have been speculating what the geoglyphs could mean ever since they were discovered, but there have been absolutely no definitive answers. The Nazca Lines are some of the most unexplainable things on the planet. And in 2019, they got even more confusing when researchers announced that they had detected 143 never-before-seen geoglyphs in the south of Peru, dating back from between 100 BC and 300 AD, and ranging in size from about 16 feet to 330 feet, 5 meters to 100 meters. One of the coolest new discoveries shows a two-headed snake feasting on humans. With these extra geoglyphs, there are now over 1,000 ancient designs in the area. As for how the new drawings were found, it was thanks to researchers from Yamagata University in Japan, who used high-resolution 3D data to see the patterns etched into the floor of the desert, which otherwise would have never been detected by the human eye. The good news here is that now the Nazca Lines are even more mysterious. Number 5. The Japanese UFO. In Japan, stories of unidentified flying objects go back much further than most people realize. There, the phenomenon is known as Utsurobuna, which means hollow ship. There have been accounts all through the ages of strange visitors in hollow ships coming to Japan, with one of the most famous being in 1803 when a round vessel apparently washed up on the Japanese coast, and a beautiful woman emerged from it wearing unknown clothing and carrying with her a mysterious box. So far as the legend goes, the woman was unable to communicate with locals and had mysterious writing scrawled across the outside of her vessel. But here's what's really crazy. According to Professor Tanaka Kazuo from the Gifu University, who's been studying ancient Japanese UFO sightings for many years, the account of the mysterious woman arriving on the Japanese coast is written of extensively in the years that followed, suggesting there's more truth to the incident than many people admit. Of course, there have been theories. Some historians have argued that the story could be an embellishment of a crashed Russian whaling ship, but no evidence of this has ever been found and no lost ships were documented in the area during 1803. And what's also very interesting is that considering how isolated Japan was all the way into the 1800s, they couldn't really have gotten the inspiration for such a tale from elsewhere. To this day, nobody knows who the woman in the hollow ship was or why she landed in Japan. Number 4. Mysterious astronaut statue. The Cathedral of Salamanca dates all the way back to the 12th century, and yet it depicts a carving on its wall of what can only be described as an astronaut. As you can already tell, this is one of the weirdest archaeological mysteries out there. After all, how could anyone carve an astronaut back in the 12th century in Spain? This is an ancient cathedral that should definitely not have an astronaut on it. But wait, because there is actually nothing mysterious at all about this astronaut statue. Despite what you may see people saying online, this is not evidence of a time traveler or a visit from outer space. The astronaut carving was actually included in the Cathedral of Salamanca back in 1992, after we had already been to space multiple times. This is a pretty funny example of how quickly people forget things, and how gullible people can be. Near the newly carved astronaut, you can also find the carving of a dragon eating ice cream, a bull, a rabbit, and even a crayfish. Number 3. Corpse bees. An absolutely horrifying discovery was recently made in Poland, and it has left scientists scratching their heads. A human corpse was found filled with bees, wasps, and the leftovers of a squirrel. These animals had all been nesting inside the human corpse, according to Dr. Marcin Kadej from the Institute of Environmental Biology at the University of Wrocław. The body itself was discovered purely by accident, when someone came across a dead person strung up inside some trees in a secluded spruce forest. Inside the body was the physical nest of the common wasp, a small nest of honeybees, and the nest of a squirrel. Further studies showed that the human had been stuck inside the tree for about 13 years, and yet despite all that time, his corpse was found in very good condition. It had been partly mummified, and according to the science team, his natural mummification was kind of an accident. One of the main reasons that the man didn't decompose very quickly was that he was up in the trees. He wasn't on the ground where things like foxes could pick apart his corpse. He was also protected because he was wearing pants and other clothing that sheltered him from the rain. But nonetheless, the man turned into a natural ecosystem known as a hollow, in which forest bees and wasps and squirrels could comfortably make their nests. This is the first recorded incident of such a thing happening. It is doubtful that the man had intended to become a mini habitat when he walked into the woods 13 years ago, but that's just how things go sometimes. Number 2. Ancient mystery coins. Archaeologists have been faced with a monstrous mystery after a hoard of around 119 coins were discovered sealed inside of a container beneath the rubble of a collapsed building in the ancient port city of Corinth in Greece. The big mystery for archaeologists is why nobody went to retrieve the stash of cash after the building fell in on itself. According to Paul Scotton with California State University and the lead professor on the project, the question has been troubling researchers ever since. The coins were all found only about 16 inches, 40 centimeters beneath the collapsed roof tile. It was extremely close to the surface and anyone could have easily dug the coins out. Instead, the owner of the coins either didn't want to go get them back or had been unable to do so. To this day, scientists can't figure out why. When the coins were found a couple of years ago beneath the remains of the building and beside what was once a workyard, there were no human remains with them. The earliest coin inside of the hoard dates back to just after the famous death of Emperor Constantine the Great, who ruled Rome from between 306 and 337, and the most recent coins were from between 491 and 518, under the Byzantine Emperor Anastasius I. Unfortunately, how the building collapsed and buried the treasure is still unknown, and who the treasure belonged to is still a mystery. The coins may have been cursed, or the owner of the coins may have suffered some kind of horrible fate before he ever managed to retrieve them. Number 1. The Worm Statue. In Florence, Italy, there's a very strange statue that appears to show some kind of worm slithering through the neck hole of a man, right where the head should be. This is at the new sacristy, which was designed with help from the legendary painter and sculptor Michelangelo. The new sacristy itself was built as a mausoleum for members of the infamous Medici family in Italy. But it's outside the mausoleum where this strange statue is located, inside the entrance passage. The statue was crafted by a close pupil of Michelangelo named Silvio Cassini, and while it may appear that there's a worm or some kind of leech slithering out of the man's neck, the truth is that it's just supposed to be the end of his spinal column. It looks mysterious at first glance, and it's true there's not a lot of known history about the statue, but it almost certainly wasn't designed purposefully to look like a worm. Number 10. Abandoned cement blocks. One of the most fascinating abandoned relics from World War II is located in Scotland. A line of defensive barriers that once lined the Moray coastline between Findhorn Bay and Cullen Bay went straight through the dark and spooky Lossy Forest and Rose Isle Forest. These massive concrete barriers, which look like something you'd find at a construction site, were actually known as anti-tank blocks. They were used as a method employed during World War II to keep tanks from coming into an area. The blocks were erected in a single straight line to prevent enemy attacks from sneaking past if the Germans were going to try a sneak attack by unloading soldiers on the Scottish mainland. These blocks were often joined by pillbox bunkers where soldiers would be stationed to keep a lookout. The anti-tank blocks are still there today in Scotland, stretching across the forests. They were constructed originally by the Polish Army Engineer Corps stationed defensively in Scotland. And even though no German tanks rumbled through the woods during the war, the concrete blocks still served as a safety precaution until the battles ended and they were abandoned. Number 9. Military devices in the backyard. Police were forced to evacuate a small neighborhood near the Toronto Pearson International Airport when 3 military devices from World War II were handed into a fire station. According to Toronto City News, a local resident discovered the 3 explosive devices in their backyard and decided he should probably take them to the fire station for the local firefighters to handle. It was quickly determined by the professionals that the devices were still live and seriously dangerous. The emergency disposal unit was called in to dispose of the military explosives, and luckily there were no injuries. After the businesses around Airport Road were evacuated, everything was finished and the military devices were properly disposed of. The real mystery here is what the military devices were doing in someone's backyard in Toronto. Canada is not like England or the rest of Europe. There hasn't been an armed conflict in Canada in recent times, and so there's no reason for a military device to be buried in anyone's yard. What likely happened is that a collector or ex-soldier acquired the explosives, and then they were just forgotten about until the poor homeowner almost blew himself up. Number 8. Soviet submarine. Urban explorers recently broke into an abandoned Soviet submarine nearly 75 years old, currently docked in the waters off the coast of Amsterdam. The submarine is a Soviet Foxtrot B-80, actually designed just a few years after the Allied victory over the Germans. The submarine has been rotting for over a decade in full view of the city and its residents. Knowing that it probably wasn't guarded, Bob Tyson paddled out and climbed inside. What he found was a literal time capsule filled with relics from the days of the Cold War. There were Soviet stars emblazoned on the missile storage containers, rusted pipes and gears and levers everywhere, and heaps of random personal items and trash. According to the Daily Mail, the Foxtrot entered into the Russian fleet in 1956 and by 2002 was discarded and no longer relevant. It was used briefly as a presentation space in 2002, and ever since then it's been sitting unwanted in Amsterdam waters because multiple owners have apparently refused to pay a tariff. Even though Amsterdam wants to tow the abandoned sub away from the city, nothing has happened yet. What do you think should happen to this abandoned submarine? Let me know in the comments down below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 7. The Old Mill Ruin. The Old Mill Ruin in modern-day Volgograd is one of the ugliest structures still standing from the devastating Battle of Stalingrad during World War II. It is often considered a serious turning point in Germany's assault against Russia and one of the most brutal, bloody, and deadly battles during the entire war. Most of Stalingrad was leveled by the assault and the months of artillery fire. After the battle finished and the smoke cleared, almost all of Stalingrad was in ruins. And while most of the city was rebuilt and renamed Volgograd, the old mill was left alone. It was abandoned to its fate as a kind of memorial monument and is still the only large ruin from the battle standing in the city today. Everything else was either cleared away as rubble or built again from scratch. The mill was actually a grain mill before being destroyed and eventually abandoned. It sits next to the local museum dedicated to the Battle of Stalingrad. The roof is missing, but the red brick walls are somehow still standing strong. The interior is nothing but a hollow shell. It's probably the biggest war relic not just in Volgograd, but in all of Russia. Number 6. The German Artillery Battery. The German artillery battery located at Lons-sur-Mer in France is the most notorious weapon from D-Day, when the Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. This gun was perfectly positioned to take on the landing armies on June 6, 1944. It was installed at the edge of a roughly 180-foot, 55-meter cliff, with a direct line of sight to where the Allied fleet was landing between Omaha Beach and Gold Beach. This destructive weapon took many lives. It had 4 150mm guns and 1 120mm gun, and they were used to devastate the incoming soldiers. In May 1944, the battery was still operational, but the firing command post built on the edge of the steep cliff didn't have enough of the necessary equipment for calculating the most effective fire against targets anymore. The artillery battery was eventually overrun by British troops, and afterward, the battery was just kind of abandoned. There was a lot going on and nobody thought about tearing down the old German battery for years, letting it slowly decay on its own until it was recently turned into a tourist site. Now visitors can check out the old abandoned battery that once housed 180 Nazis hell-bent on killing everything that stepped foot on the shores of Normandy. Number 5. Mounsell Army Seaforts. The Mounsell Army Seaforts are some of the strangest abandoned structures left over from World War II. They rise out of the water like strange space invaders from a science fiction novel. The rusty structures are located in the Thames estuary and were originally built in 1942 as part of a vast defensive network to defend the British Isle against German aircrafts. Each of the forts consisted of a small cluster of stilted buildings surrounding a main command tower. Back in the 40s, there were catwalks connecting every building to one another. But those days are long gone and the catwalks have since decayed. After the war, the forts were abandoned and left to crumble into the sea. Today, there are only 2 of the structures left. They're called the Red Sands Fort and the Shivering Sands Fort. But these sea forts' history gets even stranger. After they were decommissioned in the 1950s, a pirate radio station famously commandeered one of the forts throughout the 1960s and 1970s. When they got their use out of the structures, they simply abandoned the area. And even though there have been projects proposed throughout the early 2000s to restore at least one of the forts to its previous glory, it has still never happened. They can be seen by boat or from Shoeburyness East Beach on a clear day. The forts are now in varying states of decay, and attempting to enter them is probably not the best idea, if it's not outright illegal. In all honesty, the final 2 structures will probably break apart and fall into the sea in the next couple of years. Number 4. Hurtgen Forest. After the Allied forces crossed the German border in September of 1944, they undertook the longest single battle ever recorded in United States Army history. They fought from September 1944 until February 1945 in a single area of 50 square miles. The battle happened in Hurtgen Forest as part of Operation Queen, with the main goal being the capture of the town of Schmidt. But the only way to actually capture the small town and secure the Ruhr River and its important dams was to fight through the forest. It became a brutal trench battle just like in World War I. The Hurtgen Forest was heavily fortified by the Germans, who had prepared the area for battle years before the war had even started. It was filled with numerous bunkers, deep trenches, challenging obstacles to stop tanks. Minefields, barbed wire, and the rain and snow didn't make it any easier for the soldiers. By the time the Americans finally pushed through, there was a total of around 60,000 casualties. Afterward, the entire forest was just kind of left alone and abandoned to Mother Nature. Not a lot was done to cover up what had happened in the woods either. Today, you can still see the trenches and manholes all throughout the area. There are deep trench lines running across the forest floor, concrete remains of dozens of destroyed German bunkers, leftover air ventilation shafts sticking through the soil, and countless bullets hidden beneath the dirt. Nowadays, the Battle of Hurtgen Forest is known, but for many years the story of this bloody battle was a harrowing chapter in Allied World War II history, and because of this, it was not very famed by historians. Number 3. Abandoned Torpedo Launch Station. There's an abandoned World War II torpedo launch station still sitting off the coast of Poland. It's about 1,000 feet, 305 meters from the shore, and clearly visible from a secret remote beach that almost nobody visits. This is a huge relic from World War II, used by Germans to launch torpedoes in the Baltic Sea. It was only used between 1942 and 1945. In modern times, the eerie complex has been nicknamed Torpedonia. After the war, the area was given back to Poland and the station was taken by the Soviets. They used the facility for military dive training until they too eventually abandoned it and the entire place fell into disrepair. All the usable equipment was taken for use elsewhere in the USSR, and the entire station was just left to rot. There was once a long wooden pier connecting the complex with the shore, but that was blown up purposely to make it harder for curious civilians to reach the launch station. But still, a strong swimmer can easily make it to the facility and explore the abandoned rooms. Would you be one to explore Torpedonia? Number 2. The Secret Transport Tunnel. Near a popular tourist neighborhood in Stockholm, there is an old and overgrown train track with a dark, intriguing, and somewhat secret history. The old industrial track was crafted between 1925 and 1940, and the entire purpose of the track was to bring wounded men arriving by ship at the nearby harbor to an underground disaster center hidden beneath a local hospital. However, it was never actually used during the war. No wounded soldiers ever arrived by boat into the nearby Stockholm harbor. The track was violently bombed by the Soviets during February 1944, and there was never any additional work done to complete the tracks or the secret disaster center. Today, the tracks in the underground tunnel are abandoned and mostly unknown by locals and visitors alike. Number 1. The Ruins of Antoni. The village of Antoni was already close to being abandoned before the war ever started. This small town is situated near 2 artificial basins constructed in the late 1930s in the Toronto Valley. Antoni has seen its share of conflict for hundreds of years, as it was for a long time a historic stronghold between the Papal States and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Another complicated history altogether. Then, when the artificial basins were built in the 1930s, most of the fertile lands were lost and many of the inhabitants just packed up their things and left. Then World War II came, and during a bombing mission by US airplanes, the village of Antoni was partially destroyed and every last living resident hightailed it out of there as fast as they could. The village sat as an abandoned ruin for the next 50 years, until the town was purchased in the 1990s and restored to its previous glory. It was then turned into a tourist hotspot that you can still visit today, with a new art exhibition center and museum. But don't worry, there are still some hollowed out ruins in the village that you can explore. Number 10. Ancient Remains. Alaska is full of mystery. One of the most recent mysterious discoveries is showing just how much we don't know about this ancient landscape. According to the Anchorage Daily News, the skeletons of 2 infants who lived and died around 11,500 years ago were just discovered. The remains of these children are telling a story about the ancient people who lived in Alaska near the end of the last ice age. Apparently, after testing the genetics of the human remains, scientists have determined that this is the first real evidence that all Native Americans are able to be traced back to the same small population that migrated to North America using a land bridge from eastern Siberia over 30,000 years ago. This is obviously an amazing discovery. It means that every native person from the tip of Argentina to the wild Canadian north came from the same tribe of humans that moved out from ancient China and Russia and into the New World before the land bridge vanished behind them and left them isolated for over 10,000 years before Europeans discovered the continent. The infants' remains were found inside of a burial pit in the Tanana River Valley in the center of Alaska. Both were female, and DNA evidence suggests they were likely first cousins. One of the children was only 12 weeks old when she perished, and the other was likely born premature with no chance of living. Scientists hope to discover even more amazing secrets as excavations continue. Number 9. Message in a Bottle. There's nothing quite as mysterious as a message in a bottle. And while you might expect to discover a message in a bottle while strolling along the beach of a deserted island, a family in Alaska recently found one during a fishing trip. A man named Pat Brashler found the bottle while on a trip with his family, and first thought it was just garbage. On closer inspection, he realized there was a note sealed inside the bottle. It ended up being a note from a family from 2007 who had apparently been on a camping trip in Houston. The letter went on to say that whoever found the bottle and the message was to call a number and tell them that their daughters are safe. This is a pretty ominous message, and when the number was called, it didn't go through. The note suggests that somebody's girls were at some point in danger, but nobody knows who those girls were because there were no full names given. The Alaska State Troopers were informed about the message, but they claimed that no missing persons cases involving a pair of females were active. This has obviously created quite a bit of a stir, but there's simply nothing that can be done. The mystery of the message in the bottle will likely haunt Pat and his family for the rest of their lives. Have you ever seen a message in a bottle? Where? When? What was in it? Tell me about your experience in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to American Eye if you haven't already for more incredible videos just like this one. Number 8. The Ice Monster. A mysterious ice monster has been spotted in Alaska, and it's sparking comparisons to the Loch Ness Monster. A bizarre video of a strange thing swimming through the Chena River near Fairbanks in Alaska has turned the internet upside down. While some claim it's an ice monster, others are claiming it's a giant Arctic crocodile or even a zombie salmon. Unfortunately, the video is so vague that it's impossible to tell what exactly the ice monster is. According to the Alaska Bureau of Land Management, one of their employees in Fairbanks had been checking out the ice when he noticed something strange moving up the river and decided to record it. That's how the video of the ice monster was taken. Unfortunately, the creature was quite far in the middle of the river, and so it was impossible for the employee to get a good look at it or do a proper investigation. Realistically, the ice monster was probably nothing but a large Alaskan sturgeon or a bull shark. But then again, it could have just been a piece of moose hide covered in ice. There's really no way to say what the mysterious ice monster was. However, it's interesting to think that there is some kind of horrifying ice fish swimming through the rivers of Alaska, yet undetected by civilized society. Could there truly be some kind of prehistoric beasts related to the Loch Ness Monster hiding in plain sight? Number 7. The Mystery of Portlock. One of the most mysterious events in modern Alaskan history is the sudden abandonment of the small town of Portlock in the early 1900s. So far as the story goes, a man named Albert Petka discovered a hairy creature living in the forest near the village in the 1920s and even had a confrontation with the beast. He supposedly scared the creature off, but only after receiving a fatal blow to the chest. It was around this same time near the village of Portlock that there were also stories about hunters and prospectors going missing, only to have their bodies turn up in the creek with their limbs ripped off as if mangled by some kind of monstrous creature. Then came the 1930s. That was about the time that all the villagers of Portlock, where stories of the hairy monster had been circulating for decades, suddenly moved away. The post office in town shut its doors, everyone abandoned their jobs, and the area was promptly deserted. To this day, nobody knows if there truly was a massive hairy beast that frightened the villagers away from their homes, and the mysterious deaths of the prospectors and hunters have never been solved. Number 6. The Alaskan Bigfoot. A lot of people don't know that Bigfoot also lives in Alaska. While there are certainly plenty of reports of Bigfoot being seen throughout Canada and the northern United States, there have actually been quite a few sightings of an ape-like creature wandering through the Alaskan wilderness. One of the most recent Bigfoot sightings happened near Ketchikan on the side of a logging road. An unnamed person posted a video online of what genuinely appeared to be a large ape man walking through the forest. The beast had grayish hair, it was at least 7 feet, 2 meters tall, and it looked incredibly powerful. Unfortunately, the creature was extremely difficult to see in the video footage as it was hidden behind the trees. Like all other video footage of a Bigfoot encounter, its exact proportions were obscure. Of course, this discovery has given just enough evidence to make Bigfoot believers go crazy, while not giving quite enough evidence to convince anyone who was not already a believer. There's really no way to know if this random guy truly did discover Bigfoot wandering near a logging road in the forest, but it's definitely possible. The big question here is, what relation does the Alaskan Bigfoot have with other North American Bigfoots? Are they cousins? Do they come from the same lineage? Or are they all remnants of great apes that went extinct thousands of years ago? Number 5. UFOs in Alaska. Alaska has been known as a UFO hotspot for decades, but one of the most interesting cases of a UFO being discovered happened when 3 unidentified flying objects decided to play a game of tag with a Japan Airlines cargo flight for nearly an hour. This happened in 1986 on November 17th. The flight crew discovered the UFOs hovering just outside of their aircraft. And for the last 30 minutes of the incredible encounter, the objects were even tracked on both military and civilian radar. This is considered to be the most legitimate encounter of the third kind ever recorded. According to the Anchorage Press, the whole encounter was even verified by an administrator at the Federal Aviation Administration. The incident received coverage from all over the world, and to this day people believe it was the first true documentation of the discovery of alien life within our planet's atmosphere. So what went down on that day? Well, it began with lights moving strangely at a safe distance from the aircraft. But then, two of the spaceships appeared directly in front of the cockpit, and apparently the pilots could even feel the heat from what they assumed to be the thrusters warming their faces. For the next 50 minutes, the UFOs basically played games with the aircraft, circling it, doing all kinds of crazy maneuvers around it, and then eventually vanishing from radar and physical vision in a split second. To this day, the incident has never been explained. Number 4. Missing in Alaska. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery of all is not even a discovery, but more of a revelation. There have been a shocking number of vanishings inside an area known as the Alaskan Triangle, which is basically the equivalent of the Bermuda Triangle except far deadlier. The Alaskan Triangle stretches from the north coast to Anchorage and encompasses a huge area of mostly unexplored wilderness. There are mountain peaks, vast tundra, and a lot of places where a person can go missing. But what's truly fascinating is that state troopers almost never find bodies. And this is amazing considering that somewhere around 16,000 people have disappeared inside the Alaskan Triangle since 1988. To put that in perspective, it's about 4 out of every 1,000 people in Alaska that have gone missing, over double the national average. The most famous disappearance happened back in 1972, when the U.S. House Majority Leader Hale Boggs vanished somewhere between Juneau and Anchorage. His airplane literally disappeared. It triggered one of the largest search operations in U.S. history. Over 40 military aircrafts, 50 civilian airplanes, and hundreds of rescue workers searched for over 39 days within a massive area over rural Alaska. However, no bodies were found, no plane wreckage was discovered, and to this day there's no trace of what happened to Hale Boggs. Number 3. Supervolcano. Get ready for the end of the world. An extremely mysterious supervolcano has just been discovered hidden beneath the Aleutian Islands in Alaska. According to Science News, the supervolcano connects other existing volcanoes and is so big that if it had erupted any time in the past 5,000 years, it would have decimated civilizations all across the planet. Diana Roman, a volcanologist from Washington, D.C., claims that even though the discovery of this massive volcano has not yet been totally confirmed, there's evidence that the potential supervolcano is part of an extraordinary volcanic cluster of 6 volcanoes inside the island chain. There's a giant magma chamber about 12 miles across connecting all these different volcanoes, meaning if one of them erupts, they'll all probably erupt, making it one of the most dramatic supervolcano events in history. Luckily, there's no evidence that an eruption is going to come anytime soon. Still, if it does happen, the entire world will probably be sent back to the last ice age. Number 2. Ancient footprint. A student from the University of Alaska has recently discovered one of the oldest human footprints ever found. This discovery happened at an archaeological dig south of Fairbanks, and the footprint in question is about 1,800 years old. It's definitely the oldest of its kind ever discovered in the subarctic of North America, and it's now being used to help scientists figure out just what ancient people were doing in Alaska all those years ago. According to the head of the archaeological team, the print was found at an extremely famous place known as Swan Point, which is arguably the largest and most important archaeological site in all of Alaska. As for the footprint itself, it was likely left behind by a small child. Archaeologists claim that the child had a house at Swan Point, probably a typical indigenous summer bark house complete with a fire pit. By examining the footprint closely, researchers were able to determine that the child was likely of a healthy weight, which means that the child was probably happy. If the child was happy, it means that the rest of the inhabitants were probably happy too. This has led researchers to assume that they were probably living relatively peaceful lives with lots of ample food and water. Unfortunately, there have not been a lot of house excavations in the area. This means that researchers have to use every bit of evidence they can to decipher the ancient people that lived at Swan Point for over 14,000 years. Number 1. Prehistoric Hammer. A landslide a few years ago near Sitka in Alaska produced one of the most fascinating discoveries involving early human occupation of North America. The discovery was a complete fluke. A pair of archaeologists mapping the destruction of the landslide just so happened to find what looked to be a rather unusual rock within the thousands of tons of rubble. As seasoned archaeologists, they recognized the rock immediately as being some sort of prehistoric stone tool. It ended up being the find of a lifetime. The rock, which was found shaped like an L, was once used as a bashing tool. The rock had a smooth handle and had likely been chiseled by an ancient human to resemble a hammer. Archaeologists call these types of tools hand mauls, and they were used primarily for driving wedges made of antler or bone into cedar trees to split off planks, which would then be used for a variety of buildings. It's still a mystery who exactly was responsible for handcrafting this extremely primitive hammer. Considering it came out of a landslide, it could have been buried in the dirt and snow for up to 40,000 years. But for the foreseeable future, the hand maul will be stored inside the archaeological collection at the Museum of the North at the University of Alaska. What do you think has happened to all the vanished people in Alaska? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and come back soon for another amazing video right here on American Eye.